Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to speak to you all today. As George says, I work in the same office as him, and that's pretty much the reason I'm here. Yeah, that means I'm at the University of Exeter. I'm not sure where everyone else in this group is from. I understand that it's kind of a cross-institutional sort of network. I'm a part-time PhD student, and I'm going to be talking to you today about my project, and that is investigating the relationship between theory of mind and teaching, or as I've put on the slide here, human pedagogy. I thought before I sort of jump into that, I might give a couple of points of context. My sort of academic background is in psychology, and I've always had a very particular kind of interest in autism. But the project that I'm doing at the moment and that I'm telling you about today is principally concerned about a more broader topic, that is trying to understand the relationship between cognition and what are distinctly human behaviors like teaching. I should also say that I'm not someone who personally identifies as a neurodivergent individual. And because I'm talking about autism at some length, I kind of want to bring that up at the start here. I realize that, that might be a point of contention. I don't plan on saying anything controversial, but I think it's important that I'm upfront about that. And, we can open up a dialogue about that if we want to at the end. Harking back to a conversation I did have with George, I'm conscious about issues around terminology in the world of autism. In this talk, I'm going to endeavour to try and use identity first language, that is autistic person, over, say, person first language, which would be a person with autism. I might not always get that right. Sometimes I use it a bit interchangeably, but that's what I'm going to be trying to do today. With my talk, I'm going to try and cover some of the sort of theoretical background to my project, break down a couple of the experimental designs that I've been using, and how I'm seeking to kind of empirically examine these issues that I'm raising. Okay. All right. So why is this question in particular quite interesting? Well, I think it's fair to say that the human species is an extremely adept species when it comes to teaching. We teach all kinds of different types of people, different pupils. We teach them all kinds of different things. We use it really, really flexibly, and we use it really, really sensitively. That's under no doubt here. And our mastery of teaching really underlines our ecological dominance over the planet. It's enabled us to pass on incredibly complex ideas and constructs to other individuals, and that's sort of accelerated our technological and cultural development over time. And the teaching that we do as humans seems, on the face of it, so different to any kind of behavior that you see anywhere else in the animal kingdom. A lot of scholars have concluded that we are the only species that engage in it. But that is an assumption that's guilty of this fabulous term, which I still am not 100% sure I know how to pronounce correctly, which is anthropofabulation. That is basically the assumption that we are really quite special and clever, and that there are certain things that we humans do that only we can do. There is a large part of this observation about teaching being a powerful tool that contributes to our ecological dominance, that assumes that we are the only species that does it. And that ignores a sizable chunk of evidence that's been connected in a completely different sphere in the ecological sciences. So whilst it's true that maybe no other species teaches as much as we do, what we can observe is that certain non-human species do engage in teaching behavior. And that's if you look at it through the lens of an operational definition, which is this definition I've got on screen, the Carrow and Hauser criteria for teaching. If you break down teaching according to this criteria, or you break down behavior according to this criteria, we've seen a handful of species that do engage in something that we think resembles teaching. So we've got three examples here, but I'll just briefly tell you about, I think, probably the clearest of the three, which is meerkats. So adult meerkats have been observed to engage in a prey handling behavior that fits this description of teaching. So adult meerkats raise pups, and what they do is the adult meerkats out in the wilds of the Kalahari find venomous scorpions, which are a very nutritious foodstuff in their environment, but they're also a very risky foodstuff, particularly for a meerkat that, say, hasn't come across a venomous scorpion before. Kill them. So what they do is they bring back venomous scorpions to the nest, to the pups. And they do this at various stages of dismemberment of the scorpion. So what this does is this bypasses some of the threat of risk to life to the pups, but it's also a costly thing for those adults to do. They could just kill and eat the thing there, and then they go on and make more babies, blah blah blah. But actually, it's more beneficial for the group as a whole, for these meerkats to learn how to deal with the scorpions in a sort of safe environment. So what we also can see is that they scaffold their learning for the pups. So very young pups will be brought completely dismembered, dead scorpions to handle. And you can see in the picture here, this is what we've got going on. Then slightly older ones will be brought a live scorpion with the stinger removed. So it's still moving around. They've got to get the thing, but they can't be hurt by it still. And then even older pups are brought basically intact scorpions. So they get an opportunity to kind of practice what they've learned. So they're engaging in scaffolding behavior. But as far as we know, they don't have this same capacity that we do for, say, higher cognition reasoning. So what is it that they're doing that enables that sensitive level of teaching? Well, the evidence seems to suggest that basically all they're doing is they're responding to the noise of the pups. The sound of the cry they make gives them an indication of the age of the pup, and they will bring an appropriately dismembered scorpion to that pup. And they'll do it even to a recording of a pup's cry, even when there isn't a live pup there. So they're not doing anything massively clever. They're just basically getting a stimulus and producing a response. So all this is kind of leading me to a bigger question, which is, do we need these higher cognition skills to adjust our teaching to the needs of our pupils? And the higher cognition skill that I'm talking about in focus is theory of mind. So I understand that this group, you might have some familiarity with this term already, but in case anybody isn't, I'm going to give you my sort of definition of it. The term theory of mind refers to basically a consideration of and reasoning around the internal mental states of others. Now, I won't go as far as saying that there are exact mechanisms that enable this, but I would broadly define it as a kind of cognitive gadget. It's something that makes use of different cognitive skills that we have in other areas, puts it together and enables us to produce this theory of mind type skill. So in the context of teaching, the argument has been for a long time that we use theory of mind and we use that skill to identify where there are learning needs and exploit those opportunities for teaching as and when they arise. To give this theory a little bit of credit, there's some logic that theory of mind might at the very least be a useful tool in the toolbox when it comes to teaching. One could speculate that it maybe is more useful in very specific pupil context. So, for example, in a one-to-one apprenticeship, where you have a master that really needs to understand what their pupil does and doesn't know in order to kind of accelerate the development. However, the current evidence to support that theory is got some methodological issues, to say the least. A lot of it has been done with very young children. And to imply that theory of mind is critical based on that evidence is to also ignore the wealth of non-human evidence we have of teaching, where clearly theory of mind is not an essential skill for its manifestation. So, alternatively, we might not need to go as far as considering the minds of our pupils in order to adjust. Non-human teachers appear to operate on a heuristical model. So they identify learning opportunities when just basically presented with an appropriate environmental stimuli. Human teaching could be predicated on this basis. We might simply use observable cues to adjust our teaching behavior appropriately. So what situations might we see teaching occur in a heuristical context? So I'll give you two brief examples. First of all, is the situation I'm in right now. When you are talking to a larger group of individuals, a group of individuals perhaps you don't know very well, it's unlikely that I've really had to make use of my theory of mind skills in order to prepare for this today. I've got a broad idea of the audience that I'm speaking to, but I've not had to go and consider each of your individual mental states in order to tailor what I'm saying. I'm just basically producing you some information that is built on my prior experiences of doing this kind of thing. So, in contrast, if someone did ask a question of me, perhaps at the end, that might be a situation where that becomes a bit more relevant. But even then, it's not always a strictly necessary thing to be used. But this kind of situation is also a very uniquely human one. Non-human species don't tend to interact with large groups of non-related kin. So there's not a lot of parallels there that we can find. Where there might be a bit more in terms of parallels is in the form of infant-directed speech. So this is the characteristically high-pitched, highly emotionally affected modulation of speech that we produce when we engage with young infants. And we've got a very good range of evidence that this is a reflexively produced behavior. It also occurs across a multitude of languages and cultures, pretty much all of the ones that we can observe, minus one or two. And it's essentially produced wherever we are presented with features of neoteny. So things like chubby cheeks, that seems to elicit this kind of speech sound. People have even been observed to talk in a similar manner when addressing their pets, particularly young pets like puppies or kittens, and even to robots when you present them a robot with infant-like features. So why is it that we do this? There's pretty good evidence that this type of behavior accelerates the language development of the infants that we address. And it seems to be related to one particular characteristic of our speech, infant-directed speech, which is hyperarticulation of vowel sounds. So importantly, we do see that in infant-directed speech, but not in pet-directed speech. So we're doing something that we're perhaps not very conscious of to help kind of develop the language of our young. So clearly this has got a kind of pedagogical element to it. And we can see parallels of this phenomena in non-human teaching. So for example, in the picture here, this is a zebra finch. And zebra finches modify their song specifically in the presence of juvenile finches. In a similar kind of way, they accentuate certain aspects of the song, and this seems to aid the chicks' learning of those songs. And you can even see similar sorts of findings in species of bats and species of dolphins in terms of the communication techniques that they use. But here we know that the teachers are not going to be, or we don't know that they're using any kind of higher cognition to track their progress or the competency of their pupils. They're simply producing this behavior in the presence of their young. So with all of that in mind, it might be fair to theorize that our human infant-directed speech is predicated on the same basis. We utilize a heuristical-based model of teaching to help young acquire language. So my research is seeking to try and evidence this heuristical theory of teaching, and that is to be done by controlling for the role of theory of mind in the context of teaching-based exercises. So theory of mind and autism, as I've kind of alluded to earlier, are terms that have been kind of occurring together since the mid-1980s. That relationship is by no means purely linear, and we continue to develop our understanding more and more about the complexity of social cognition and autism in recent years, particularly the work of Damien Milton and double empathy theory. I think there's a whole host of stuff that we still need to learn about it. So I'm not saying sort of autism equals impoverished theory of mind, but we do know that there is a kind of consistent empirical pattern when you do use theory of mind type tests. Autistic participants are notably less responsive to cues suggestive of mental state. So what we can so we can fairly reliably say that that we see that that picture in the data. So this is a project that's seeking to answer really questions about teaching approach, not not so much ability. So I'm not inferring that sort of autism would necessarily mean that you wouldn't be as an effective a teacher. It might just shape your approach in a slightly different way. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my plan for 3 experiments in my project, one of which is kind of done, one's ongoing, and another one which is in the waiting room. And I do have a little bit of data to discuss, but it's purely descriptive. So there's no formal analysis that I'll be able to present to you today. So those experiments are going to be looking at our responses to age, so how we respond as teachers to the age of a pupil, how we modulate those vocalizations, and also how the transmission of information occurs in autistic and non-autistic dyads. Okay, so this is the first study that I've conducted, and I've got the data for this, but it's just kind of in the process of being processed. What I wanted to do with this study is to try and understand whether or not autistic and non-autistic participants would adjust their teaching approach on the basis purely of the age of their pupil. So this was done with cohorts of secondary school students, and they were playing the roles of teachers. I recruited those from schools in the southwest around me. And in order to do this, I set up a scenario whereby my participant, who's playing the role of the teacher, is asked to produce 2 teaching videos. And those videos are on the subject of how to build a Lego catapult. You can see the design of that catapult in the picture here, where one of those videos is to be produced for a 5-year-old and another one is to be produced for a 10-year-old. So there's a few kind of design considerations that might sort of jump out to you immediately. First of all, the decision to recruit secondary school students here, that was a decision that was made with the intention of trying to capture a more accentuated difference in theory of mind skill, which you do see in younger individuals who are diagnosed with autism. At this age, those differences on those measures of theory of mind are most pronounced, so it made sense to work with this age group. And I also needed to engineer a situation that would avoid one-to-one interactions, because you can probably imagine that having a one-to-one dynamic is quite a fluid social situation, and perhaps it wouldn't be fair to compare autistic and non-autistic participants in that situation. So what I've done is I've tried to give both my groups of participants fair opportunity to provide how they think the information should be presented to their pupils. Logistically, it also makes a lot of sense because I couldn't really carry around a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old pupil in my backpack every day just to be produced for my teachers. So instead, what they were presented with were short video vignettes of their pupils. They got an idea of the name, the age, the speaking voice, the visual appearance of the person they were supposed to be teaching. And that will hopefully give them some amount of kind of ecological validity, some kind of sense that this is a real person and I need to help them learn how to do this. The Lego catapult was selected as a building exercise to try and give participants something they might engage in, but also to try and have a kind of uniform exercise across all participants from which I could derive a measure of teaching approach, which I'll come to in a moment. So this is kind of the descriptive data I collected data from 31 secondary school students playing the role of teachers. I took measures of their general cognitive ability. So this is to make sure that things like language and motor coordination was on a level playing field. These are things that might affect how one decides to present information to another. So wanted to make sure those were fairly uniform. And then I also utilized the triangles animation in this experiment as a measure of theory of mind. This is an exercise where participants are asked to interpret the events of a series of brief animations, with responses being scored according to the accuracy of the response, as well as the complexity of the mentalization applied to those triangle characters. So you can see that there was a sort of an approximate split in the kinds of theory of mind skills assessed using that triangles animation. I would say that I wasn't perhaps totally won over by the triangles animation. I want to use a different measure in follow-up experiments. But this is what I did in this first experiment. And then all of the participants also had an opportunity. They basically needed to learn how to build the catapult themselves. So they weren't being modeled teaching behavior, say by me, showing them how to do it in the first place. They had to learn how to do it basically using a wordless picture manual. If you imagine one of those kind of IKEA type manuals, that's what they used to learn how to do this in the first place. So they didn't have a frame of reference for how this should be taught. They just had to do it according to however they felt would best help their pupils. And I've got a little data excerpt here. I'm just going to make sure I can share the sound. So I'll see if I can play this for you, and hopefully you'll be able to hear my participants.
So suddenly you want to get one square and put it 2 squares down. So you put 1.5 a square, 1.5, like that. Secondly, what you want to do is you're going to get the black one, this one, and 2 of these little ones. So I'm going to put one on like that, on the edge.
Okay, so you can see that this is the kind of situation. They've got a table, they've got all of their building materials, and they are presenting to camera as if the pupil was there in front of them. So what did I do with that video data? So this is the process that I'm kind of still engaging with at the moment. So I'm going to do some amount of acoustic analysis of this data in line with that kind of IDS type theory I discussed earlier. But this isn't the kind of main focus for this one. Really, what I want to do with this data is try and examine the pedagogical profile of each of these participants. So to do this, I have painstakingly transcribed and formulated a coding system that aimed to try and break down each instructional step offered by the teacher into segments. So those segments are then categorized as instructional or non-instructional, and then each instructional segment is assessed for the degree of specificity offered by the participant. So for example, you might, if you're describing a material, you might present them with, say, by saying, oh, collect this piece. Or you might say, collect this brick with a cross-shaped hole inside. That would be a much more specific way of passing on that information. So I wanted to capture both, I suppose, the breadth of the information that the teachers are providing. So that is through the number of instructions given, as well as the depth of those instructions. So what amount of those instructions are specified for the benefit of their pupil. And that's to try and kind of quantify some of these elements of pedagogy. So I think that's pretty much everything for the kind of first experiment that I've done here. Yeah, I'm still in the process of doing that, and hopefully I'll be able to in a future talk about that in a little bit more detail. So just to kind of give you a bit of a background to my second and third studies. This will be a little bit briefer. So at the moment, this is what my day-to-day is. I'm running this current study, and I wanted to try and examine whether theory of mind is related to that production of those pedagogical components of infant-directed speech, so particularly a hyperarticulation of vowel sounds. And so what I'm doing here is I'm again comparing autistic and non-autistic speech. This time the study is being conducted with adults, and it's to be completed online entirely independently by the participant. So again, similar to the previous study, there's not a live interaction element here. I don't have live audience members. Instead, participants are tasked with directing their speech towards three different audience types. So infants, adults, and puppies in this case. And they get a short vignette of their audience, and that gives them hopefully some sense of realness, that this is a real individual that I'm trying to speak to here. And what they're asked to do is tell each target the events of a picture book story. And as well as that, they're asked to describe a series of images to their target audience. And this is all done utilizing a web-based app called Gorilla, which is fantastic. It basically administers the study and collects the data, and participants can kind of do it all from home. So logistically, this is a much, much simpler study than the previous one, which I'm very pleased about. And this is the study where I'm really aiming to do those acoustic analysis and find out some really informative stuff about the production of infant-directed speech in autistic and non-autistic participants. On top of that, I'm really hoping to isolate that hyperarticulation effect that I was talking about earlier. The design of the tasks here is done in such a way that I have sound tokens that I can model hyperarticulation on, and really see if people are doing it as you would expect for infants, not for adults, and then not for puppies as well. So this is an ongoing study. There's not really much more to say about it at the moment. I'll tell you about my third one, which is looking at the transmission of information. So this is building on some work conducted by someone who was working with my supervisor prior to me starting, where basically we're looking at the effect of pedagogical interactions where theory of mind might not be quite as strong. So this is utilizing a transmission chain style experiment. And in this situation, participants work one-on-one in pairs to achieve a specific goal. The outcome of that goal is tested, and then you replace one member of the dyad with a new naive member, and the experienced member then takes on the role of the teacher, passing on information to ensure that the task is more successful on the next rung of the chain. So this is done with groups of non-autistic and autistic participants. So you don't have sort of autistic to non-autistic interaction. I think that would be interesting, but that's not part of the design of this experiment. We've done this using a pipe cleaner basket task. So essentially, participants need to construct a basket out of pipe cleaners, and those pipe cleaner baskets are then at the end of the building phase filled up with marbles, and then the person walks across the room and you see how many marbles are left in it at the end, how many fall out, and that kind of gives you some kind of quantifiable element for how effective that model of basket was. Yeah, that's kind of where I am really with that. There's a bit of data there, but I'm in the process of trying to set this up and collect some more, because we need to kind of really flesh this one out. Okay, so I'm going to finish up now with a few take-home messages for you. So teaching is a really powerful tool. It is a very important thing for the human species in terms of our ecological dominance, but we are also not the only ones who do it, and we are not as clever as we perhaps are guilty of thinking we are. We might do teaching on a kind of heuristical model. We might just respond to stimuli in the same way as non-human species. Whereas previous theories speculated that theory of mind is most important to our ability to teach. And my research is basically aiming to try and evidence these competing theories and see if we can find support for one or the other. That's where I am now. So thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to me. I hope it was informative. And a big thank you to all my supervisors, of course. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me here, or if you would like to email me, I'm more than happy to do that as well. So yeah, thank you very much.